Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, a UN report reveals millions of women across dozens of developing nations are denied control over their own bodies, such as the right to use contraception or to seek healthcare. We'll be talking to Mari Bar from the Ouagadougou Partnership, which promotes family planning in West Africa. Also, a new generation of female politicians in Kosovo are pushing hard for equality in a country where few women own property, yet alone work outside of their homes. And meet the new generation of action heroes, with women now making up some 30% of the student body at the country's leading school for stunt performers here in France. Now, for the first time ever, a United Nations report has focused solely on bodily autonomy. That is the power and agency for women to make their own choices about their bodies without fear of violence or having somebody else decide for them. According to the UN Population Fund, nearly half of women in 57 developing nations are denied the right to decide whether to have sex with their partners, use contraception or seek healthcare. Their report also shows only 71% of countries guarantee access to maternity care, only 75% legally ensure full access to contraception, and only around 80% have laws supporting sexual health and well-being. Joining me now from the Senegalese capital of Dakar is Mari Bar, the director of the Ouagadougou Partnership, which promotes family planning in the 9 Francophone countries in West Africa. Thank you so much for your time. Firstly, the UN report says millions of women in developing nations are already denied the right to bodily autonomy. So how has the pandemic particularly impacted this situation in your region?
So the pandemic started a year ago, and fortunately for West Africa, it hasn't had the massive impact in terms of cases and contamination that it had in other parts of the world. All the same, though, we have to know that we've heard from our ministries of health in the 9 countries of disruptions in terms of access to service for women, especially pre-postnatal and childbirth in our health centers. And so the maternal and child mortality rates have gone up, especially between the month of April and May in countries like Senegal and Mali.
Mari, how has the pandemic particularly affected access to contraception in your part of the world?
So in terms, for example, of products, we have to say that there hasn't been as many disruptions. We had partners like UNFPA ensure that the products got to the last mile. Obviously, the contraceptives going from the central to the peripheral areas have been a little disrupted, but not as much as we had anticipated.
Now, we're seeing a rolling back of limited gains in women's rights. So how can we ensure that does not continue, particularly in West Africa?
We've seen the impact of the pandemic on girls' education, for example, which is a huge concern. The fact that they're not returning back to school at the rates that we would like for them to. There's this emphasis on boys' education rather than girls' education. So that is of concern. And our countries are currently focusing a lot on economic recovery. And I think this is the time to actually advocate and make sure that the policies that are being put in place are gender equal and give access to women, especially in terms of informal sectors like agriculture, for example, that the women bear the majority of those sectors, that the policies that are put in place are favorable to them.
But are you being heard by the governments in the region?
We have been heard by the ministries of finance, by the ministries of health especially. They've done a wonderful job advocating with the ministries of finance, making sure that the policies were equitable. There is still a lot of impact on the health sector and the health systems in our country. So obviously there are still a lot of barriers. But at least in terms of funding, our fear last year was that the funding for family planning and reproductive health would be decreased significantly, and that hasn't been the case.
Marie, one of the terrible consequences of lockdowns in most countries is the increase in domestic violence. In West Africa, it's a subject still widely considered to be taboo. Is this changing?
So there is clear anecdotal evidence that gender-based violence has increased during confinements, and unfortunately in West Africa, there's still a lot of taboos around this. So we've heard of cases of women actually reporting such cases, but at times, unfortunately, they've had to go back into their households because of economic reasons or because of family pressures. So there's still a lot of societal pressure to not condemn these acts of violence. But we've seen several leagues of women and associations just try to report as much as possible those cases and find solutions once the woman has had the courage to actually denounce those acts.
And of course, many women have had to give up their jobs to take care of children who've been stuck at home because of school closures and also thanks to lockdowns. And that must be having a massive economic impact on women in developing economies, especially in the countries that you are working in.
Absolutely, and that's the case we're trying to make to the different ministries that we're working with, that you cannot just discount 50% of the population. And so making sure that the policies are geared towards young girls and their education, furthering their education, but also towards women and their role in society and in the economy. We feel like we're being heard, but obviously there's much more that needs to be done on those fronts.
Marie Barr, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Annette.
Now, hopes are running high in Kosovo after its people voted in its second female president and the largest ever number of female MPs. The new government came to power over promises to tackle lack of economic opportunity and corruption and is more liberal than its predecessors. Yet the country is still extremely patriarchal, with most women being shut out from owning property or even holding down jobs. Cami Nedelec has the story.
A survivor of assault and newly elected MP, Vasia Krasniqi Goodman is ready to shake things up in her native Kosovo. She is one of the 20,000 women and girls raped during the 1990s conflict, crimes which have yet to result in a single conviction. With the support of her family, in 2017 she became the first and so far only survivor to make her ordeal public. When she was 16, 2 Serbs abducted her from her home at gunpoint and assaulted her. Now she's taking office, vowing to improve women's lives, leaving her own life in the US behind, where she'd lived for the past 20 years.
The only reason I'm here is to be their voice and to give them strength and courage to speak up and seek justice for the crimes that we went through.
Society here views the crime of rape as taboo, and it is the survivors, not the perpetrators, who bear the brunt of social stigma, as rape is viewed as a stain on the family's honour. Most victims feel they have no choice but to stay silent.
Stigma ka qenë e para. Derisa me stigmatizim.
So first, there's stigma. But not only have they been isolated by the stigma, it's like a new rape, because they have closed themselves off and they feel that there is no place in this society to tell their story.
The country now has a female president, and there are 43 female MPs, the highest number Europe's youngest democracy has ever had. But there's much progress still to be made. Just 15% of women own property, and only around 13% work outside the home. The pandemic has also taken its toll.
During the pandemic, we have seen an increase in violence. The number of cases of domestic violence where the victims are women has gone up.
Lockdown measures in 2020 left some women trapped with their abusers, and police reports of domestic violence jumped from around 1,500 in 2018 to over 2,000.
And finally, the world of action stunts has long been a male-dominated field, but that's beginning to change as a growing demand for female-led action entertainment has been met by a growing cadre of stunt women. Here in France, women now make up some 30% of the student body at the country's leading school for stunt performers. Brian Quinn takes a look at the action.
From falling out of helicopters, to jumping motorcycles, to flying on wires. Here at the Campus Univers Cascade stunt school in northern France, more and more women are throwing themselves into the profession.
I'm a dancer and theater performer, so I'm accustomed to a graceful feminine environment. And here, it's quite the opposite.
There's an artistic and an athletic side to it. It's choreographed, it's calculated, it's technical. There's a lot of things to keep in mind, but it's really great.
24 of the school's 80 current students are women, and the numbers are rising as demand for female performers grows with the popularity of streaming video platforms and superhero franchises. 800 hours of training are required to graduate here, but female students are often called into action well in advance.
One female student finished 2 sessions and then left for marble. There are so few stunt women that as soon as they have the slightest skills, they leave directly to work with the Americans or the British or in the rest of the world.
Growing numbers of stunt women could mean an end to the long maligned Hollywood practice of wigging, putting a stunt man in drag to stand in for an actress.
That was plan B, a wig and fake breasts. Today there's no need. Women can do the same things, so we don't need wigging anymore.
Any doubts their male colleagues might have had about toughness are quickly put to rest. The women here put through the same ringer as the men to prepare them for a new career as the world's next generation of action heroes.
And that's it for now. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. So until our next show, bye for now.